You are impure." That's what Archbishop Montgomery said, his voice echoing through the vaulted stone ceilings of the Boston underground sanctum. And I believed him. I had believed it for months, ever since the holy light began to slip from my fingertips, leaving me cold, powerless, and terrified. So when the searing iron pressed against my throat, branding me a sinner in front of the entire congregation, I didn't scream. The scent of my own burning flesh filled my nose, but I just closed my eyes and waited for the darkness to claim me. I had been Caleb Hayes, the sanctum's beloved oracle. For 22 years, I was their pristine doll, kept in a gilded cage far beneath the bustling streets of the city above. I prayed for them. I healed for them. I bled for them. But when my light faded, they didn't see a boy who needed help. They saw a defective tool. "Throw the defiler into the abyss," Montgomery commanded. His eyes, once full of paternal warmth, were now flat and cold. "Let the shadows take what belongs to them." The paladins didn't hesitate. They dragged me to the edge of the sacrificial pit, an endless drop into the uncharted catacombs and forgotten subway tunnels that predated the city itself. And they pushed me. The fall was a blur of rushing wind and sharp terror. I hit the ground hard, my shoulder dislocating with a sickening, sharp sound. The breath was knocked from my lungs. I lay there on the damp, freezing stone, coughing up blood, my branded neck throbbing with a toxic, fiery agony. They said my magic had rotted. They told the congregation I was harboring sin. But lying there in the dark, the crushing weight of their judgment finally lifted, and a quiet, agonizing truth settled in my chest. My soul hadn't rotted. It had rebelled. It was simply too pure, too raw to stomach their corruption anymore. The sanctum's light was tainted by greed and blood, and my body had finally refused to be a conduit for it. But try explaining that to zealots who needed a scapegoat. The metallic tang of my blood pooled on the uneven stone floor. I pressed my palm against the cold earth, ready to let go, ready to disappear on my own terms instead of theirs. Then the air shifted. It wasn't a subtle change. The temperature plummeted, and a scent hit me, ozone-heavy rain, and something darker underneath. It was the scent of old leather and burning embers, overwhelming and deeply intoxicating. It made the chaotic, dying energy in my veins suddenly sit up and take notice. A footstep echoed in the dark. I froze my breath, catching in my ruined throat. I expected a scavenger, or perhaps one of the mindless ghouls the sanctum claimed lived down here. Instead, as the shadows coalesced, I found myself staring at a man who made every coherent thought evacuate my brain. He was impossibly tall, easily over 6 feet, his broad shoulders shifting gracefully beneath a worn leather jacket. His hair was pitch black, swept back from a face that could have been carved from marble, all sharp, devastating angles. But his eyes held me captive. They were dark, dangerous, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my heart hammer against my ribs. I'm sorry, I wheezed my voice barely a whisper through the pain of the brand. "I have nothing for you. I'm already dying. Stay still." The words weren't a command, not quite, but they carried enough absolute authority to root me to the spot. He stepped closer, his heavy boots making a crisp sound on the gravel. He knelt beside me, his immense presence making the cavern feel suffocatingly small. I squeezed my eyes shut, expecting a killing blow. Instead, I felt him lean in. His face hovered inches from my neck, right over the blistering burn of my brand. He didn't touch me. He just inhaled a long, slow breath that sent a shiver racing down my spine. A masterpiece, he murmured, his voice a dark, velvet rumble that vibrated through the stone floor and straight into my bones. I opened my eyes in shock. What? He tilted his head, his dark eyes cataloging every bruise, every tear, every ounce of my misery. "Your soul. It's a masterpiece." But he frowned slightly, clicking his tongue. A bit tart. The despair makes it bitter. "You need to age a little longer." I stared at him, completely uncomprehending. "Who are you?" His mouth curved into a faint, predatory smile. "Damien Thorne. Let's just say I'm a hunter of things that lurk in the dark. I felt the pulse of your blood hit the stones from miles away." He reached out his long fingers, effortlessly popping my dislocated shoulder back into place. I gasped as a sharp breath caught in my throat, tears springing to my eyes, but the agonizing pain was instantly replaced by a strange, numbing warmth radiating from his touch. "You were thrown away," Damien said, his gaze dropping to the fresh brand on my neck. His jaw tightened, and for a second, something monstrous flickered in his eyes. They threw away a perfectly good feast. He stood up towering over me and held out a gloved hand. "Here is your choice, Caleb Hayes," he said softly. "You can stay here and rot in this basement, becoming exactly what they said you are, or you can take my hand and I will show you how to survive." I looked at his outstretched hand. I thought about the sanctum. I thought about the pain, the betrayal, and the lonely death waiting for me in the dark. Then I looked at this stranger who had found me at the bottom of the world and called me a masterpiece. I reached up, my trembling fingers wrapping around his. "Okay," I whispered. Damien's grip tightened, pulling me up and out of the shadows. "Good boy. Now let's get you out of this miserable hole." The escape from Boston was a blur of shadows and roaring engines. I didn't ask how Damien had bypassed the sanctum's intricate wards or how we ended up in the passenger seat of a restored midnight black 1969 Mustang parked 3 blocks from the cathedral. I was too busy trembling my body, crashing hard from the adrenaline and the lingering fiery agony of the brand on my neck. We drove through the night, leaving the East Coast behind in a trail of tire smoke and shattered expectations. I watched the city lights fade in the rearview mirror, replaced by the endless empty stretch of the interstate. For the first time in 22 years, no one was watching me. No one was expecting a miracle. It was terrifying, yet strangely intoxicating. By the time the sun began to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, we pulled into a deserted diner off the Pennsylvania Turnpike. A flickering neon sign buzzed overhead, casting a sickly red glow over the cracked asphalt. Out, Damien ordered, killing the engine. I fumbled with the door handle, my limbs stiff and aching. The winter air bit through my thin, torn sanctum robes. I shivered, wrapping my arms around myself as I followed his towering figure inside. The diner smelled of stale grease and old coffee. We took a booth in the back corner. I sat hunched over, my eyes glued to the scuffed linoleum table, overwhelmed by a sudden crushing wave of grief. I had lost my home, my purpose, my entire world in a single night. The despair was a heavy, suffocating blanket that I couldn't shake off. Across the table, Damien leaned back, his dark eyes fixed intently on me. He took a long, deliberate breath through his nose, his brow furrowing in deep displeasure. Too astringent, he muttered, crossing his arms. "God, that's incredibly bitter. It's practically ruining my appetite." I blinked, snapping out of my downward spiral. I looked up at him, then down at the chipped ceramic mug of black coffee the waitress had just slammed onto the table between us. I knew roadside diner coffee wasn't great, but Damien looked genuinely offended by it. "I'm sorry," I said quickly, my ingrained need to please kicking in. "I can fix it. Hold on." Before he could stop me, I grabbed the sugar dispenser and a handful of creamer packets, tearing them open and furiously stirring them into his mug. There. The bitterness should be gone now. It might still be a little tart, though. They probably burned the beans. Damien stared at the swirling beige liquid, then slowly raised his gaze to my face. For a moment, he looked completely baffled, a stark contrast to his usual terrifying composure. He opened his mouth to say something, then snapped it shut, his lips twitching as if he was fighting back a laugh. "Right," he said smoothly, picking up the mug and taking a sip of the sugary sludge without breaking eye contact. "The beans. Exactly what I was talking about. Much better." I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, sinking back into the vinyl booth. "I'll try to pay better attention next time." "You do that," he murmured. The waitress returned, dropping a massive plate of pancakes, bacon, and eggs in front of me. I stared at it, my stomach churning. "I didn't order this. I don't have any money." "I ordered it. Eat," Damien commanded. "I'm not hungry." "I don't care," he replied, his tone brooking no argument. He stood up, sliding his heavy, worn leather jacket off his shoulders. Before I could protest, he tossed it across the table. It landed on me like a weighted blanket. It was still warm from his body, smelling intensely of that dark, intoxicating mix of ozone and embers. "You're shivering loudly enough to wake the dead. Eat the damn food, Caleb, or I'll force-feed it to you." His words were rough, practically a threat. But as I pulled the oversized jacket tighter around my shoulders, I realized I felt warmer than I had in months. The coldness that had settled in my bones since my magic faded was slowly retreating. He spoke like a monster, but he was feeding me and keeping me warm. I picked up my fork and took a hesitant bite. It tasted like ash in my mouth, but I kept chewing under his watchful, intense gaze. Later, as we walked back out to the Mustang, the morning wind whipped across the parking lot. I pulled the collar of the leather jacket up instinctively, reaching a hand up to cover the raw, angry burn on my neck. I hated it. I hated what it meant, what it screamed to the world about my failures and my impurity. Before my fingers could brush the ruined skin, Damien's large, warm hand caught my wrist in a vice grip. I flinched, expecting him to yell. Instead, he stepped close, his towering frame completely blocking the biting wind. "Don't hide it," he said, his voice dropping to that low, dangerous rumble that made my pulse race. His thumb brushed over my knuckles, a fleeting touch that sent sparks up my arm. "It's a badge of your survival, not a mark of your sin." He paused, his dark eyes glinting with a strange, possessive hunger. "Besides, you'll ruin the perfect garnish." "The garnish," I echoed, bewildered. He dropped my wrist and smirked, walking around to the driver's side. "Get in the car, Caleb." I stood there in the freezing Pennsylvania wind, wrapped in a demon hunter's jacket, carrying the brand of a fallen oracle. And as I looked at Damien Thorne, a man who intimidated the very shadows around us, I realized a terrifying truth. I wasn't afraid of him at all. 2 weeks on the road had stripped away the remnants of the pristine, sheltered boy I used to be. The velvet robes of the sanctum had been entirely replaced by faded denim heavy boots and one of Damien's spare flannel shirts. We had crossed state lines like ghosts, leaving the claustrophobic concrete of the East Coast for the sprawling, golden expanse of the American Midwest. We stopped in a dusty, sun-bleached town in Kansas for gas and supplies. While Damien was at the pump, grumbling about the octane levels of rural gas stations, I wandered into the attached convenience store to buy water, and whatever food didn't look like it had been sitting on the shelf since the 90s. That was when I saw them. Near the back coolers, a young mother was kneeling on the linoleum floor, clutching a little boy who couldn't have been older than 5. The child was pale, violently shivering, and gasping for air in short, ragged wheezes. A severe asthma attack compounded by what looked like a dangerously high fever. The mother was frantic, screaming for someone to call an ambulance, but we were miles away from the nearest hospital. Instinct buried deep beneath months of trauma and conditioning surged forward. I dropped my basket and fell to my knees beside them. "Let me help," I said softly, my voice still raspy but steady. I didn't think. I just placed my bare hands on the boy's small, heaving chest. For the past 6 months, whenever I tried to summon the sanctum's holy light, I had met a cold, hollow wall inside myself. But here, on the dirty floor of a gas station, I didn't reach for the gods. I reached inward. A pulse of energy, warm, raw, and completely my own, flowed from my palms. It wasn't the blinding, sterile white magic of the church. It was a soft, golden glow, feeling like sunlight breaking through winter clouds. The boy's ragged breathing smoothed out instantly. Color rushed back to his cheeks, and the fever broke beneath my fingertips, leaving him sleeping peacefully in his mother's arms. The woman wept, grabbing my hands and pressing tear-soaked kisses to my knuckles. I pulled away gently, slipping out of the store before anyone could ask questions. As I walked back out into the blistering heat, my heart was pounding, but my soul felt lighter than it had in years. The sanctum had lied. I wasn't broken. My magic hadn't rotted. It had just refused to serve their corruption anymore. I was still useful. I was still myself. A genuine, uncontrollable smile broke across my face. I walked toward the Mustang, carrying a paper bag containing 2 bottles of water and a freshly baked cherry pie I'd snagged from a local bakery stand next door. Damien was leaning against the driver's side door, his arms crossed. As I approached, his gaze locked onto me. He suddenly stiffened. He took a short, sharp inhale through his nose, and his entire face contorted in a mix of profound annoyance and something that looked suspiciously like panic. He rubbed his jaw, turning his head away with a low groan. "Damn it." My smile faltered. "What's wrong? Did I take too long?" "Too sweet," Damien muttered, sounding genuinely distressed. He pinched the bridge of his nose, glaring at the empty horizon. "Way too sweet. It's overpowering. I'm going to get a cavity just standing near you. If you keep this up, I'm going to end up with diabetes." I blinked, thoroughly confused. I looked down at the paper bag in my hands. The bakery box was slightly warm, oozing a sticky red syrup from the corners. "Oh," I said, feeling a rush of embarrassment. "I'm sorry. The lady at the stand said the cherries were locally grown, but they must use a lot of corn syrup in the glaze. I can scrape the filling off if it's too much sugar for you." Damien slowly turned his head to look at me. The expression of absolute baffled disbelief on his devastating face was almost comical. He stared at me for a long, silent moment, then let out a heavy sigh, dragging a hand down his face. "Right, the pie," he grumbled, shaking his head. "Just get in the car, Caleb." Hours later, the Midwest heat broke, giving way to a cool, breezy evening. We pulled off the main highway onto an empty, forgotten stretch of Route 66. The sky above the plains was bleeding into magnificent shades of violet and burnt gold. We sat side by side on the warm hood of the Mustang, the metal ticking softly as the engine cooled. Between us sat the open bakery box. Damien hadn't complained about the sweetness once since we started eating methodically, working his way through half the pie. I sat with my knees pulled to my chest, a quiet contentment settling over me. Whenever a shadow stretched too long or the distant howl of a coyote pierced the air, Damien didn't say a word. He didn't offer empty platitudes about how I was safe. Instead, he simply allowed a fraction of his dark, terrifying aura to bleed into the air around us. It was a silent, lethal warning to anything hiding in the dark, telling them that if they touched him, they would cease to exist. It shouldn't have been comforting. He was a monster, a hunter of the dark, a man who possessed a power that rivaled the demons I used to read about in the Sanctum's forbidden archives. Yet, as I looked at his sharp profile, illuminated by the dying sun, the fierce line of his jaw, the dark eyes that watched the horizon with predatory vigilance, the last remnants of my fear evaporated. He hadn't asked me to pray. He hadn't demanded my obedience. He just demanded that I eat, that I wear his coat when I was cold, and that I survive. I looked down at the brand on my neck. It didn't burn tonight. In fact, it barely hurt at all. I shifted closer to him on the hood of the car, my shoulder brushing against his arm. Damien didn't pull away. The boundary between gratitude and whatever this new, terrifying feeling was had finally begun to blur. We found shelter at the edge of the Arizona desert in an abandoned motel that time had forgotten. The faded sign outside proudly advertised color TV and AC beneath a layer of rust and sand. Room 7 smelled of stale dust and old rain, but after days of sleeping in the Mustang, the lumpy mattress felt like a luxury. I had just stepped out of the tiny flickering bathroom, drying my hair with a scratchy towel, when the air in the room suddenly turned suffocatingly heavy. The door didn't just open, it exploded inward with a violent crash. Splinters of cheap wood rained down as a blinding, sanctimonious white light flooded the dim motel room. I stumbled backward, dropping the towel. Standing in the doorway were 4 men clad in the heavy, silver-plated tactical gear of the Sanctum's elite paladins. At their center was Commander Vance, the Archbishop's most loyal hound. "Look at this!" Vance sneered, his lip curling in utter disgust as he stepped over the shattered doorframe. He looked at me dressed in my oversized flannel and then at Damien, who was casually leaning against the far wall. The fallen oracle playing house in the dirt with a filthy mercenary. "You truly are a wretched, impure thing, Caleb." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. All the confidence I had built over the last few weeks vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by the crushing, paralyzing conditioning of my past. I backed against the peeling wallpaper, my chest heaving. "You belong to the abyss," Caleb Vance continued, his voice dripping with venom. "You are an infection, a mistake. Impure infection, mistake." As panic hijacked my lungs, a horrifying heat flared at my throat. The brand, the mark of the fallen Montgomery, had seared into my flesh, violently ignited. It wasn't just a scar anymore. It was glowing with a volatile, punitive, holy fire, feeding off my sudden self-doubt and terror. I let out a sharp cry, clutching my neck as the smell of my own burning skin filled the room once again. I fell to my knees, blinded by the sheer, blinding agony of the church's judgment. Then the temperature in the room plummeted to freezing. The cheap light bulbs overhead shattered instantly with a sharp sound. The paladin's holy light flickered and dimmed, swallowed by a sudden oppressive darkness that poured from the corner of the room. Damien moved. He didn't run. He simply ceased to be in one place and appeared in another. "You talk too much." Damien's voice was a terrifying, inhuman rasp that echoed from every corner of the room. "And worse, you're making my meal go bitter." Before Vance could even raise his silver broadsword, Damien's hand shot out. He gripped the commander by the throat and lifted the massive man off the floor with zero effort. The other 3 paladins charged their weapons, glowing with holy energy. Damien didn't even look at them. He flicked his free hand, and a wave of pure concussive shadow threw the heavily armored men through the motel window, sending them crashing into the parking lot. Damien's eyes, usually a dark, fathomless brown, were bleeding into a horrifying, luminous crimson. Black veins crawled up his neck. The air around him distorted with a monstrous, crushing pressure that made the floorboards groan. He wasn't just going to kill Vance, he was going to tear him to pieces. I could feel the ancient apocalyptic rage rolling off him in waves. "Damien, stop," I choked out, fighting through the searing pain in my neck. He didn't hear me. His grip tightened and Vance's face turned an ugly shade of purple, his legs kicking weakly in the air. I couldn't let him do this. I couldn't let Damien lose his humanity, whatever was left of it, because of me. Gathering every ounce of strength I had, I scrambled forward and threw my arms around Damien's broad back, pressing my face between his shoulder blades. "Please," I sobbed, my voice breaking. "Please don't. Let him go." Damien froze. The monstrous aura stuttered and halted the second my hands locked over his chest. He stood perfectly still for a second before opening his hand. Vance dropped to the floor, heavily gasping and coughing for air, before scrambling backward and fleeing into the night with his broken squad. I slumped against Damien, my legs giving out as the holy fire in my brand flared higher, punishing me for my defiance. I let out a soft whimper, waiting for the darkness to claim me. Damien turned around and caught me before I hit the floor. He dropped to his knees, pulling me against his chest. His crimson eyes locked onto the glowing, burning scar on my neck. "It hurts," I gasped, tears streaming down my face. "It's burning me alive." Damien didn't say a word. His expression was a storm of raw, unbridled fury and something deeply desperate. He gently gripped my jaw, tilting my head back to expose my throat. Then he leaned down and pressed his lips directly against the blistering brand. A sharp gasp escaped my lips. His lips were unnaturally, impossibly cold, like the deepest ice of a frozen abyss. The moment he kissed the scar, a surge of dark, soothing magic flooded into my skin. It swallowed the punitive holy fire whole, extinguishing the burning agony in an instant. The pain vanished, replaced by a deep, resonant hum of protection. He lingered there, his breath cold against my skin, his presence an absolute shield against the entire world. When he finally pulled back, the jagged, ugly brand had changed. The charred skin was now traced with delicate, dark, ink-like veins, his magic permanently intertwined with my scar. I stared up at him, breathless, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. We were inches apart. I could see the battle raging behind his eyes, the hunger, the possessiveness, and the terror. Slowly, painfully, Damien released my jaw. He stood up and took a deliberate step back, putting distance between us. The shadows retreated, and the crimson faded from his eyes, leaving him looking guarded and untouchable once more. "Pack your things," he said roughly, his voice completely devoid of the terrifying warmth he had just poured into my skin. "We need to leave before they bring reinforcements." He turned and walked out the broken door. I stayed on the floor for a long moment, my fingers gently touching the cool, dark mark on my neck. He was pulling away, hiding behind his walls. But as I felt the lingering ghost of his kiss against my pulse, I knew with absolute certainty that I wasn't going to let him. We drove for 3 days straight, trading the blistering heat of the desert for the biting, unforgiving cold of the Colorado Rockies. The snowstorm hit us just as we found an isolated, abandoned hunting cabin tucked deep into the pine-covered mountainside. It was completely cut off from the rest of the world, shrouded in white. For the first time since my fall from the sanctum, I felt entirely safe. The cabin was drafty, smelling of old cedar and dust, but I managed to get a fire roaring in the stone hearth. Damien sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, bathed in the flickering orange light. He had finally taken off his heavy leather jacket and his flannel, leaving him in just a dark t-shirt. I knelt on the floor beside him, a damp rag in my hands. Ever since the Arizona motel, Damien had been quieter, keeping a rigid distance between us. But more pressing than his silence was the angry, blistering burn snaking up his left forearm. It was a holy magic burn, a severe backlash from when he had kissed the punitive fire out of my brand. His dark magic had saved me, but the sanctum's light had retaliated against his flesh. "This is going to sting," I murmured gently, dabbing the wound with a salve I had made from pine needles and snowmelt. Damien didn't flinch. He just watched me with those intense, fathomless eyes, his jaw set in a hard line. "I don't feel it." "You're lying," I replied softly, my thumb carefully tracing the uninjured skin near his wrist. "You took my punishment. You let it burn you so I wouldn't have to suffer. It was a tactical decision." A screaming passenger is a distraction on the road. His voice was gruff, a defensive wall slamming down between us. He tried to pull his arm away. I didn't let him. I tightened my grip, looking up from his injured arm to meet his gaze. The firelight danced across the sharp planes of his face, highlighting the exhaustion he was trying so hard to hide. "Why do you do that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, competing with the howling wind outside. "Why do you pretend you don't care? You feed me. You protect me. You literally took holy fire into your own body for me. And yet you look at me like you're waiting for me to run away." Damien stiffened. The air in the cabin grew suddenly heavier, the shadows in the corners stretching unnaturally toward him. "Because you should run, Caleb. If you had an ounce of self-preservation left in that pure, naive soul of yours, you would have run the moment I pulled you out of the abyss." "I don't want to run," I said, the truth finally spilling over. I let go of the rag and reached up my hand, resting gently against his chest, right over his heart. It beat slow and heavy beneath my palm. "I'm exactly where I want to be." "You don't know what you're saying." Damien stood up abruptly, forcing my hand to drop. He began to pace the narrow room like a caged apex predator. "You think I'm some knight in tarnished armor, some gruff, misunderstood savior. I'm not. You are a creature of light, Caleb, even if the sanctum was too blind to see it. And he stopped, his broad shoulders heaving, "I am the absence of it." "I don't care," I said firmly, standing up to face him. "I love you." The words hung in the air, fragile and terrifyingly real. The wind outside seemed to hold its breath. Damien froze. He stared at me as if I had just driven a silver blade through his chest. A look of absolute agony crossed his face, a terrifying crisis of existence tearing him apart from the inside. He leaned in close, his voice a lethal vibrating purr meant to terrify me. "I didn't save you out of the goodness of my heart. I am a monster, Caleb. I look at you, and all I want is to devour you, to consume every ounce of that brilliant, pure soul until there's nothing left. If you let me near you, I will ruin you." It was the perfect lie wrapped in a terrifying truth. He was trying to scare me away, to protect me from himself. I looked up into his desperate, furious face. I didn't tremble. I didn't cower. Instead, I lifted my hands, gently resting my palms against his tense, cold cheeks. I stroked my thumbs over his cheekbones, offering him a sad, tender smile. "Then do it," I whispered, holding his gaze without a shred of hesitation. "Even if you want to take my life, Damien, I am completely yours to take. I would rather be ruined by you than saved by anyone else." Damien's breath hitched. A shudder violently ripped through his massive frame. In that moment of absolute vulnerability, his ironclad control shattered. The illusion of the rugged human hunter violently cracked. The temperature in the room plummeted. Shadows erupted from his back like massive broken wings. And when I looked into his eyes, the human brown had completely vanished. They were glowing terrifyingly crimson, the eyes of an apex demon from the deepest pits of the abyss. Slit pupils staring down at me, radiating an ancient apocalyptic darkness. He waited for me to scream. He waited for the disgust, the horror, the realization that I had just offered my heart to the very devil the sanctum had taught me to fear. But I didn't see a devil. I just saw the man who had kissed away my pain. Slowly, deliberately, I closed the distance between us. I wrapped my arms securely around his waist, pressing my face into his chest, burying myself in the scent of ozone and embers. "You're freezing," I murmured against his shirt. "Come back to the fire." Damien let out a sound that was half sob, half growl. His monstrous crimson eyes widened in absolute shock before fluttering shut. Slowly, his massive arms came down, wrapping around me with a crushing, desperate gentleness, holding me as if I was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. He buried his face in my neck, right against the dark, ink-like scar he had left there, and finally the demon surrendered to the light. The piece we found in the Rockies was a stolen thing, and the sanctum was never one to let its property go. We had made it as far as a quiet, rain-slicked logging town in the Pacific Northwest when the sky ruptured. I had just stepped out of a local pharmacy, a bottle of painkillers in my hand, when a blinding, sterile white dome slammed down over the entire valley. It wasn't a search barrier, it was a purge array. Screams echoed down the main street. Around me, innocent people collapsed to the wet asphalt, clutching their chests as the array began to forcibly siphon their life force. Caleb Damien was suddenly beside me, his hand gripping my bicep. The shadows around him were writhing violently, reacting to the oppressive holy magic crushing the town. "We need to move. Now. It's a localized drain. They're trying to starve the town of ether to flush you out." Before I could answer, a voice boomed from the center of the town square, magically amplified and dripping with self-righteous fury. Caleb Hayes, you carry the taint of the abyss." Archbishop Montgomery's voice rolled over the dying town like thunder. "Surrender yourself to the holy light, or watch these heathens perish for your sins." I looked at the people gasping for air on the pavement. A child was weeping next to his unconscious mother. The sanctum, the institution that claimed to speak for God, was massacring an entire town just to execute one runaway. A familiar paralyzing terror tried to claw its way up my throat, but as I felt Damien's solid cold presence beside me, the fear shattered into 1,000 pieces of blazing, undeniable clarity. "I'm not running anymore," I said, my voice steady. I stepped out from the awning of the pharmacy and walked directly toward the town square. Damien didn't try to stop me. He walked right beside me, his crimson eyes locked on the Archbishop, who stood surrounded by dozens of heavily armed paladins. The defective Oracle Montgomery sneered as I approached. He raised his golden staff, its tip glowing with stolen, corrupted life force. "Look at the devastation your impurity has caused. Repent, Caleb. Burn with the monster you've chosen, and I will spare these people." "You don't speak for the light," I said, my voice ringing out clear and unbroken. "You only speak for your own greed." I didn't close my eyes. I didn't clasp my hands in prayer to a God who allowed this cruelty. Instead, I pressed my hands to the wet earth. I reached deep into the core of my own soul, past the trauma, past the branding, tapping directly into the raw, unadulterated well of my own existence. A pulse of brilliant, warm gold erupted from my palms. It swept across the wet asphalt like a tidal wave of morning sun. It wasn't the sanctum's harsh, blinding glare. It was gentle breathing, life back into the freezing air. Wherever my light touched, the townspeople gasped, their color returning as the suffocating grip of the purge array was violently shattered. Montgomery's face twisted in absolute ugly rage. Heresy killed the defiler. He thrust his staff forward, unleashing a massive, lethal spear of concentrated burning white energy directly at my chest. I stood my ground, my golden light flaring to meet it, but before the strike could even reach me, the world plunged into absolute pitch-black darkness. Damien stepped in front of me. He didn't just block the attack. He caught the spear of holy light in his bare hand and crushed it into sparkling dust. The air pressure plummeted so violently that the windows of the surrounding storefronts blew out with a loud sound. The human disguise Damien had worn for months violently disintegrated. Massive obsidian horns curled from his dark hair. Gigantic wings woven from the deepest, most terrifying shadows of the abyss tore from his back, casting the entire square into an eclipse. Black armored scales trailed up his arms and neck, and his crimson eyes burned with the fury of a dying star. This was the apex demon of the voids, a creature of absolute destruction. The paladins dropped to their knees in sheer terror, their weapons clattering to the ground. Montgomery stumbled backward, his arrogant facade crumbling into pathetic, whimpering horror. "You," Montgomery gasped, pointing a trembling finger, "a primeval." Damien didn't even grant him a word. He merely raised a single clawed finger. A shockwave of pure, suffocating darkness exploded outward, swallowing the Archbishop and his elite guard whole. The sanctum's corrupted light was snuffed out like a candle in a hurricane. There was no blood, no sound, just the absolute erasure of the men who had tortured me. When the shadows finally settled, the square was empty save for the two of us. Damien stood amidst the silent ruins, his massive wings draped around him like a heavy velvet cloak. He was breathing hard, his demonic features sharp and terrifying. He kept his back to me for a long time, as if waiting for me to scream to finally see him as the monster he had claimed to be. Slowly he turned around. The demonic aura was suffocating, but when he looked down at me, his crimson eyes were incredibly fragile. "I crawled out of the abyss to devour you." Damien's voice was a deep, inhuman rumble that vibrated through the earth beneath my feet. "I came for a feast." But now he swallowed hard, his clawed hands trembling slightly at his sides. "Whether it is your flesh, your magic, or your soul, I only want to cherish you. If this world rejects you, Caleb, then my hell will become your heaven." Tears pricked my eyes, but they were tears of profound, overwhelming relief. I didn't see a monster. I just saw the being who had braved holy fire to heal my scars, who had bought me cherry pie in the desert, who had just torn down an entire regime to keep me safe. I stepped over the cracked asphalt, walking right into the terrifying, freezing aura of the apex demon. I reached up my hands, tracing the dark, intricate scales on his jaw, before my fingers gently ghosted over one of his massive obsidian horns. Damien shuddered, his heavy eyelids dropping as he leaned into my touch. "You already are my heaven, Damien," I whispered. I pulled him down by the collar of his ruined shirt and pressed my lips to his. His mouth was cold, tasting of shadows and ozone, but the kiss set my soul completely on fire. His massive wings wrapped around us, a shield against the rest of the world, enveloping me in the holiest darkness I had ever known. The news of the sanctum's complete collapse reached us a few weeks after the incident in the town square. Without Archbishop Montgomery and his elite paladins to enforce their dogma, the underlying corruption of the church was finally laid bare for the world to see. It shattered from the inside out, a rotten structure giving way under the weight of its own arrogance. But we didn't stay to watch the fallout. We kept driving until the road ran out, settling in a quiet, rain-drenched coastal town nestled deep in the pine forests of the Pacific Northwest. I wiped down the polished wooden counter of my new apothecary and veterinary clinic, the smell of dried chamomile and lavender filling the warm air. It wasn't much, just a converted general store with a faded hand-painted sign, but it was mine. Here, I didn't need to be a pristine oracle. I was just Caleb, the local herbalist, who had a surprisingly miraculous touch with injured stray dogs and sickly barn owls. I still used my golden magic, but only in quiet, gentle pulses, a secret gift, rather than a demanded spectacle. Through the frosty glass of the back window, I watched the most terrifying creature to ever crawl out of the abyss do the yard work. Damien stood in the backyard, a heavy iron axe in his hand. He had shed his jacket, wearing only a dark, fitted Henley that strained against his broad shoulders. He wasn't using his demonic form, the wings and horns were hidden away beneath his human glamour, but he swung the axe with supernatural, effortless force. A massive log of dense oak split perfectly in two, with a resounding sharp sound, the wood practically exploding under the sheer absurd strength of the apex demon. I leaned against the sink, smiling softly as I watched him. He paused, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow, and his dark eyes flicked up, catching me staring through the window. Even from across the yard, I felt the familiar, thrilling shiver race down my spine as his predatory gaze locked onto mine. A few minutes later, the back door creaked open, letting in a gust of crisp, rain-scented wind. Damien stepped inside, stomping the mud off his heavy boots. The scent of ozone-damp pine and dark embers instantly swallowed the floral notes of the clinic. "You're staring again, Caleb," he rumbled, closing the door behind him. "I was just admiring the view," I replied, turning back to the stove where a fresh cherry pie was cooling on the rack. "You went through a cord of wood in 10 minutes. If the neighbors see you, they're going to start asking questions." "Let them ask," Damien muttered, crossing the room with lethal grace. He slipped his arms around my waist from behind, pulling my back flush against his solid chest. His chin rested heavily on top of my head. "If they get too curious, I'll just swallow their shadows. That usually keeps humans quiet." I laughed, leaning back into his embrace. "You can't eat our neighbors, Damien. Mrs. Higgins brings us fresh eggs on Tuesdays. I suppose I can spare her." "Then," he conceded, turning me around in his arms. He leaned down, capturing my lips in a slow, deep kiss. His mouth was cool, a stark contrast to the warmth of the kitchen, but it sent a rush of liquid heat straight to my core. I reached up my fingers, tangling in the dark, damp hair at the nape of his neck, pouring all my overwhelming contentment and love into the touch. Suddenly, Damien pulled back, breaking the kiss with a sharp inhale. His brow furrowed in a deep, agonized scowl, and he turned his head away, groaning softly. "Damn it, Caleb, you're too happy lately." "Excuse me. Your soul," he grumbled, gently poking me in the chest. "It's practically overflowing. It is so incredibly disgustingly sweet today. I can taste the joy rolling off you. It's overpowering. I swear to the abyss I'm going to get cavities just kissing you." I stared at him for a second before bursting into bright, unrestrained laughter. The terrifying, world-ending demon was complaining about a sugar rush. I picked up a knife, sliced a generous piece of the cooling cherry pie, and held it up to his mouth. Here I teased my eyes, crinkling with mirth. Balance it out with some actual sugar. Damien eyed the pastry with deep suspicion, but he opened his mouth and let me feed him anyway, chewing methodically before leaning down to steal another kiss, this one tasting like sweet cherries and dark magic. As his lips brushed mine, his thumb reached up, gently tracing the side of my neck. The brand of the fallen oracle was still there, but it no longer burned with punitive holy fire. The charred flesh had been entirely replaced by the smooth, ink-like black veins of his demonic magic. It didn't hurt. It hadn't hurt since the night he kissed the pain away in that dirty motel room in Arizona. It was no longer a mark of my exile. It was the absolute anchor that tied me to him. I rested my head against his chest, listening to the slow, steady drum of his heart. The fear and the running were finally over. I had spent my entire life trying to be a perfect vessel for the light, believing that any shadow would taint me. I had let them convince me that because I was cast into the dark, I was ruined. But as Damien's massive arms wrapped securely around me, shielding me from the chill of the rainy afternoon, I realized the absolute truth. The sanctum was wrong about the dark. It wasn't empty, and it wasn't cruel. Sometimes the deepest abyss is the only place where you can truly find your heaven.